Okay. All right, so what I'm going to look at in 5.6 is factoring trinomials. Okay, that's all about that. So really what this deals with is taking a trinomial and then be able to write it as a multiplication problem. So there's a couple things I want to go over from your background. Trinomial has 3 terms. That's why we call it trinomial. And those things are going to be separated by plus and minus signs, okay? That's how that basically goes, all right? What's that? Oh, yeah, go ahead, please, okay? All right, so what we're going to look at to focus with here is the first term will usually have a variable squared. The last term's generally just a number, not always, but that's what we're going to start with. And then the middle term just has like a number in front of a variable usually. So there's 3 terms, and it can be separated with plus or minus signs. That's why we call it a trinomial. Okay, does that help any? Okay, let me pause it real quick, and then I'll go back and do. So first thing I want to show you is we're going to learn how to factor trinomials. We'll work on this a lot. So what I want to do first of all is show you an example. This is a trinomial. This is the factored answer. So the first thing I want to do is show you how you can tell that it's the right answer. Okay, so let's go ahead and let's multiply this out. And we reviewed the FOIL a little bit. So FOIL is something you want to make sure that you're totally clear on and you can do with ease in this class, okay? So, because that's going to be how you're going to check your answers when you factor a trinomial, okay? And you just mostly do this in your head. So the first term just means we're taking x times x, so that's going to give x to the second. Anytime you multiply x by x, that's what x second is. The outside term is going to be a positive 4 times x. And see, that's a positive answer, because it's a positive times a positive. So that gives 4x. Okay, the inside term is a negative 7 times a positive x. So that's going to be a negative 7x like that. Okay, then the last term you're doing the multiplication negative 7 times 4. So that's going to be minus 28 like that. Okay, does that look familiar and reasonable to everybody? Okay, it's very important you know how to do this in this class. Now, how about these like terms? Are those like terms? So put them together. 4 minus 7 is negative 3. So you would have x squared minus 3x minus 28. Now, the reason that this is the correct answer is because it matches the problem that we're working on. I'm going to show you how to get that answer, x minus 7 times x plus 4. But I want to show you, for now, that's how you tell you're right. Does that make sense to everybody? Okay, so you want to be sure that you have that ability to FOIL okay and check your answers to these, okay? All right, so before we get into the factoring, we're going to look at this little activity. This is sort of preparing you for factoring. So here's kind of the idea. We're just trying to do this mostly in our head. So we're trying to find 2 numbers that have a product of 14. What does the word product mean? Multiply. You're multiplying 2 numbers and get 14. And at the same time, they sum 15. What does sum mean? They add up, okay? So let's do this. Let's write down every possibility of 2 numbers that multiply to give 14. There's only 2 possibilities. There's 1 times 14. What else is there?
2 times 7.
2 times 7, okay? Now, you got to figure out of those 2 possibilities, which one would add up to 15? The 1 and 14 or 2 and 7? 1 and 14, right. So the answer to the problem is 1 and 14. And the reason is because 1 times 14 is 14, and 1 plus 14 is 15. Okay? So if I give you a product and a sum, you can always either find only one answer or no answer at all. Okay? So most of the time you'll be able to find that one answer. Okay? Let's look at the next one. Now we're looking at 2 numbers that multiply to give negative 8. And at the same time, they have to have a sum. In other words, they have to add up to 7. So what I'm going to do, I'm not going to worry about the negatives right now. I'm just going to worry about, we know that 1 times 8 would give 8. And then we also know what else is possible.
4 times 2.
2 times 4, okay, like that. Now don't worry about the negative. Now, which one of those combinations of numbers would you be able to get to add up to 7 if we put the signs in a smart way? 1 and 8. Okay, 1 and 8 are 7 apart, aren't they? So what you can do is, if you want to get 1 and 8 to add up to 7, okay, what you have to do is you have to have a negative right there, right? Negative 1 plus 8, 7. So that means that that would be the answer of the problem, would just be the number negative 1 and 8. Negative 1 times 8 is negative 8, and negative 1 plus 8 is 7. Does that make sense? Okay, and you'll see why I'm teaching this in just a minute. Okay, so your goal on problems like this is probably 90% of the time to be able to quickly be able to do it in your head. If you can't do it in your head, then I recommend that you kind of list things out the way I'm showing you here. Okay, all right, now we're going to look at a product of numbers that are 54. Okay, now I'm going to write down all the possibilities. Okay, 1 and 54. 2 and 27. You could use a calculator to help you a little bit with this. If you take 54 divided by 3, that's 18. Okay, if you take 54 divided by 4, let's see, I don't think that works. I think you also get 6 times 9, like that. Okay, and I think that's it. Okay, that's all the possible things that you're going to get to multiply to give 54. Now, out of these possibilities, there's 4 possibilities, which one would you be able to get to add up to negative 3 out of that possibility?
6 and 9.
6 and 9, exactly. 6 and 9 are 3 apart, so that means you can make it add up to negative 3 if you're clever how the signs go. Okay, so let's see if we can figure that out. All right, if we're going to make 6 and 9 add up to negative 3, which number would have to be negative? The negative 9, good, okay. So we would have that like that. All right, so that means that, see, 6 times negative 9 is negative 54, and now we got it to add up to negative 3, so that means the answer of the problem is 6 and negative 9. Okay? Again, your goal, for the most part, is not having to write that down unless you have to. All right, so trying to do that in your head is really your goal. Okay? All right, let's do the next 2 here. I'll just give you a couple of minutes to do the next 2. And if you can do these in your head, just do them in your head. I'm fine with that. But use kind of a strategy to come up with here. So let's see, this one, if I wrote down the possibilities, you would have 1 times 28, 2 times 14, only other possibilities 4 and 7. Now your ability to do that depends on how well you know multiplication facts in your head. So anyway, which one are you going to get to add up to 29?
128.
Now that one's pretty easy. So yeah, this is the correct thing, is you know that 1 times 28 is 28, and then you know that 1 plus 28 is 29. So the combination is 1 and 28. 2 positives, right? Okay. All right, the next one, you got to be kind of careful about this one. I'm going to write everything down. You have 1 times 30, you have 2 times 15, 3 times 10, and what else is there? 5 times 6, that's it. Nothing else is possible. Now, if you look at this problem, the numbers that are 13 apart are 2 and 15 and 3 and 10. Now, remember, I said there's only one possibility, if there's any possibility at all, so which one's the right one? 3 and 10, right, okay. See, what would happen on this one is if you had negative 2 times 15, well, that would add up to 13, but it would multiply to give negative 30, so that can't be the right one. So the correct choice is just to have 3 and 10, because 3 plus 10 is equal to 13, like that, okay? So sometimes you have to have one or both of the numbers as a negative as well, like I showed on a few examples. So as we do these problems, you'll get plenty of practice doing that. Okay, is there any questions about what you've done so far? Okay, now what we're going to do, the purpose of showing that is we're now going to factor trinomials, and this would be kind of a good starting point. You have 3 terms. So what you want to do on this is, to start with, is just draw 2 parentheses. And remember, what we're doing is we're creating kind of a FOIL problem. So when we FOIL out our answer, it should give us s squared plus 7s plus 10. Okay? So the first term is going to be s squared. So that's real simple. That means that's got to be s times s. S times s is s squared. That can't be anything else. So the first term's going to be super easy. Okay? Now the last term is going to be a 10. So what you're doing with this is you want to look at all of the possibilities of things that multiply to give 10. And there's only two things, 1 times 10 and there's 2 times 5. So you're either going to put 1 and 10 or 2 and 5 there. Okay? The middle term is what really answers the question for you. That 7s is like the outer and inner added together. So what you're really doing on this problem is you're looking for numbers that multiply to give 10 that add up to 7. So what's the right combination? 2 and 5, right. 2 plus 5 is 7. So see, that's the correct one. So that means what we're going to do is we're just going to insert a 2 there and a 5 there like that. And it doesn't matter which is which. You could put 5 before the 2. Doesn't matter. Okay, what I try to get students to do, in particular for more advanced factoring, is figure out your signs at the end. So like if you FOILed this, 2 times s is 2s. If you go to the outside term, that would be 5 times s. Okay, and what you're trying to do is make it add up to 7s, so that just means both things have plus signs. So that would be your factored answer, would be s plus 2 times s plus 5. Because see, what you're really doing is finding numbers that multiply to give the last term that add up to the middle term. Does that make sense? So it's just a combination of numbers, okay? Now let's check this one. I'm not going to check all these, but let's check some of them, because what you need to do as a student is anytime you factor anything, you want to make sure you're right. So we just FOIL this out. So the first term, s times s, is s to the second. The outside term, you have s times 5. Be careful how you write an s and a 5 too, so you don't confuse that. So that's 5s. The inside term is 2 times s, so that's 2s. Then the last term's 2 times 5, so that's 10 like that. Okay? What happens is the middle terms add up to 7, so you get s squared plus 7s plus 10. That takes you back to the beginning of the problem, so that means that's right. So that's the process that you would go through on the problem. Okay, how's that look to everybody? Okay? All right? Now, they're a little harder when you have negatives in it, but it's still the same basic idea, okay? So what I'm going to do with this one, again, so let's just start by drawing 2 parentheses. And the first term is going to be u squared. So that's easy. That just means that's got to be u times u. That's all that can be. Okay, then the last term is going to have to be 28. And then the negative 11u is the outer and inner added together, okay? So again, you can do this totally in your head. Your goal is just to do it totally in your head and not have to write anything on your paper except the answer. So let's look at the last term. We have 1 times 28. We have 2 times 14 will give 28. And we have 4 times 7. Okay, so which one are you going to get a negative 11 out of those combinations? 4 and 7, right? Okay, it's got to be 4 and 7. Now, specifically, how do you get 4 and 7 to add up to negative 11? They both have to be negative, exactly. So more specifically, you would want to have, see, negative 4 times negative 7 is 28, but negative 4 plus negative 7 is negative 11. So that's the combination that you're after. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to put 4 and 7. Again, you can do that backwards and have the 7 then the 4, it doesn't matter. Okay, and then when we look at this inner term, that's a 4u. That outer term is a 7u. The way you make that add up to a negative is if they're both negative. Okay, so that would be the answer of the problem, and then that could be checked by doing the FOIL like that. Okay? All right, is that reasonable? This is all about numbers, okay, and how numbers add and multiply. That's totally the idea. Any questions about that? Would everybody be able to check that okay? Okay, that's super important. That's how you catch mistakes when you do stuff. Okay, let's do a couple more of these, and I'll let you practice a few of these. Okay, so let's see. With this one, again, that's the first term. That's the last term. Sometimes students look at the combination the wrong way, so a lot of times when I'm teaching that, I just tell students to write that on there if you need to. All right, so let's write it out. So the first term, of course, is going to be x times x to get x squared. Okay, the last term, you have 1 and 42, 2 and 21, 3 and 14, And let's see, 4, 5, 6, and 7. Now, you may not be able to do that as fast as I can because I teach math every day, so I can just do that super fast, but you can use your calculator to help. So, which one of those things are you going to be able to get to add up to that middle term, negative 1x? 6 and 7, exactly. 6 and 7 are 1 apart, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to work with this one. So just put the 6 and 7 in. Now all you got to do in your head is just figure the signs out. I'm going to do this visual. I think this is helpful. So that's 6x. That's 7 times x. So tell me, how do you make 6 and 7 add up to negative 1? Something's got to be negative. What has to be negative? The 7. Now the 6 has to be positive, right? Because you know 6 minus 7 is negative 1. Okay? So that means the plus goes with the 6. And the minus goes with the 7 like that. Okay, problem done. Now, one thing you can do on this, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the checking, but guys, you can check in your head. I mean, if you look at this, x times x is x squared, right? We know that's right. Look at the last term. 6 times negative 7 is negative 42. And we already know the outer adds up because that was 6x minus 7x is negative x. So most of these problems, you really want to check in your head. The attitude is, you factor, you check in your head anytime you can, okay? All right, here's another thing that can happen. So watch this one carefully. This one's a little weird. So the first term is x squared. Last term is 54. And then the negative 1x is just the outer and inner combined. Okay, so if I went through and tried to put this together, what I'd have is, of course, the first term would be x and x. Now I'm going to go ahead and write all the factors of 54. So I've got 1 in 54. And so I always do this logically. 1 in the number. Then I do 2 in the number if it works. If I don't know that, I'll just go to my calculator. 54 divided by 2 is 27. Then I've got 3 and 18. 4 does not go into 54. 5 does not. 6 goes in 9 times. And that's all the possibilities you could find out. So, which one of these groups of numbers, pairs of numbers, would you be able to get to add up to negative 1x? The answer could be none of the above. None of the above, right? Okay, there's no way you could get any of these numbers to add up to negative 1. Do you agree with that? Because none of them are 1 apart. So that means it doesn't factor. And not everything factors. If something doesn't factor, then what we're going to say is we're just going to say it's prime. Okay, it doesn't factor over real numbers. It factors over complex numbers, but we don't care about that at this stage, okay? All right, so does that make sense what I'm doing on this, okay? Okay, well, let's try to do the next 4 problems. I'll let you try those. And I'll see where we get with this. So again, your goal is to be able to do it pretty quickly in your head. So the first one, let's see, I have S and S on that. Okay, the last term, for 15, all you have is 1 and 15 or 3 and 5. So which one's the right one? 3 and 5, good. Okay, so you got S and S, 3 and 5. The middle term has to add up to 8. So how do you make 3 and 5 add up to 8? Just 2 positive numbers, right? So that's a 3s, that's a 5s. If you're going to get a plus 8s, just have 2 plus signs, okay, like that. Okay, and then that would be the solution to your problem right there, okay? Check if you want, okay? At least get to a point where you can check in your head, okay? Now the next one, let's see, first term is t squared, last term's 80, and then the 18 would be what you're trying to get those to add to. Okay, so when we do this, let's see, we'd have t and t for the first. Now for 80, for some of you I could tell it came right to you. If not, you have 1 and 80, 2 and 40, 3 doesn't work, 4 and 20, 5 and 16, 6, 7, 8, and 10. That's it. Which one works? 8 and 10, because 8 and 10 can be added up to get 18, right? But they got to add up to negative 18 specifically. Okay, now just watch for signs. That's generally one of the places where students sometimes have some issues when they're learning this. So how do you make 8 and 10 add up to negative 18? They both have to be negative, right? Negative, negative, okay? All right, so your answer on that should be this. Now, you can always have these reversed. You can have t minus 10 first and t minus 8 second. It doesn't matter. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and check this one. I'm just going to do a few of these as we go. So just to show you how this one works, the first term would be t to the second. The outside term would be negative 10t. Okay, the inner term would be negative 8t. So see, those are going to add up. And then notice the last term, what do you have? A negative times a negative, so what do you have? Positive 80. Okay, so what you'd have then is t squared minus 18t plus 80. That takes you back to the beginning. Okay, like that. You're in charge. You can tell you're right on these problems 100%. Okay, the next one. Okay, I see this a lot when I teach a problem like this. If you have double-digit numbers, what does it divide by? Because not everybody seems to know that, I can tell. 55, 66, 77, 88. They all divide by 11, right? Okay, I see a lot of students sometimes on this problem because of multiplication fact issues that don't know that. So what I would do with this one then is when I start this out, I'm going to start with x and x. Now for 99, there's only two things. There's 1 and 99 and there's 9 and 11. That's it. So which one's the right one? 9 of 11. Good. Okay, so we got 9 and 11. Okay, the inner term is 9x. Outer term's 11x. So tell me how you make 9 and 11 add up to negative 2. The negative goes with the 11, right? Okay, the bigger number. And then the positive goes with the 9, like that. So that means you have plus 9 minus 11. That's your factored answer. Okay, like that. You must have a negative 11 and a plus 9. You can't get your signs backwards, because if you do, they're wrong. But you could write your answer like that. Same answer. Okay, does that make sense? Okay. All right, the next one. Okay, let's see if I was trying to trick you on this one. I don't know. So let's see. This one, the first term, of course, would be x and x. All right, now let's look at the 15. There's only two possibilities. There's 1 and 15, and there's 3 and 5. Now, you're trying to get them to add up to 14, so there's no way 3 and 5 add up to 14. But you can get 1 and 15 to add up to 14, can't you? But you got to be careful on this problem. I'm going to go ahead and put 1 and 15 there, and I want to show you something just in case you made this mistake. So that would be 1x. The outer term would be 15x. And we're trying to make this add up to 14x. So you might think, well, how about if I have a positive 15 and a minus 1? Okay. But that's not right. I want to see how many people caught this. Why is that wrong? Yeah, the 15 doesn't work, right? If you look at this right here, what's negative 1 times 15? Negative 15. That's not what the problem said. The problem said positive 15. So it does not factor. Okay, there's no way you can get a combination, even though you can get the 1 and 15 to add to 14, that messes up the multiplication. Does that make sense? So that one's prime. You got to be really careful about that. So no matter what you try on that one, you won't get it to work. Okay, and that happens every now and then when you're factoring trinomials. Okay, all right, so how's everybody feel so far? Okay, we're going to push on and continue to do this at different levels and just kind of different little nuances. Okay, so let's go ahead and I'm going to do the next two here and show you this. Now what happens on this, it's still a trinomial, but what you notice now is you got two variables. Still the same principle. One thing you'll notice, the first term has an x, the last term has a y, the middle term has both. Same thing with this. First term's u, second term's v, middle term has a blending of both. So it's still done the same way. So what I'm going to do with this one is we're going to start off just drawing a parenthesis. And the first term's going to be x and x. Okay, we got that. That's the easy part of the problem. Okay, the last term, we need to also have that y in there, so you need to be kind of careful about that. The possibilities for the last term would be 1y and 28y, 2y and 14y, and 4y and 7y. Okay, now which one are you going to get to add up to negative 3xy? So 4 and 7. Okay, let's just put them in there and see. We know that 4 and 7 are 3 apart, so we can make them add up to 3. So put it in, and you need to kind of see how these variables work. You must put a 4y and a 7y like that. Okay? Oh, not a 3. Let's do a 4. 3 times 7 would be 21. Okay, so let's do this term right here. See, that would be 4xy. I put that in alphabetical order. You can say yx also. That outside term would be 7xy. What you're trying to do is make that add up to a plus 3xy. Okay, everybody see what I'm trying to do here? Now see how the x and y's blend? So tell me how you make 4 and 7 add up to positive 3. Something's got to be negative. What? There you go. Okay, so you got to have a negative 4 and a plus 7, like that. Okay, so that means the negative goes with the 4, and then the plus goes with the 7 like that. So that would be the factored answer. Okay, everybody see how the x and y blend? It's not a different problem. It's just same concepts, just got an extra variable to it. Okay. All right, let's look at the next one. Okay, so the first term on this one is going to be a u. So when we draw the two parentheses, we're just going to go u times u. And then the last term is going to be 35v to the second. So the possibilities are going to be 1v times 35v. And the only other possibility is 5v and 7v. Which one's the right one on this problem? Yeah, what makes the 5 and 7 correct? Because you can make them add up to negative 2. Okay, it's the same idea. Okay, so what we do is let's just put it in. Let's put 5v there. Let's put 7v there. I like to kind of try to get students to draw this visual, and I'm going to say 5uv there. When I multiply that, that's 7uv. You're trying to make this add up to that middle term, negative 2uv. So how do you make that happen? Negative 7 plus 5, right? Okay, so you got to have negative with the 7 plus with the 5 like that. Problem done. Okay, does that look okay to everybody? Okay, don't let that extra variable bother you. It still is exactly the same concept. Okay? All right, so I'm going to let you guys do the next two for a few minutes. Okay, so it looks like you guys are doing good. All right, so let's see. This one, first term, you have x and x. Okay, last term, your choices are 2y and 4y, or 8y and 1y. So I think I saw everybody get a 2 and 4, which is good. I did see some people getting signs backwards. When you're learning this, you got to be careful about that. So see, that inside term is 2xy. This last term, outside term is 4xy, and you're trying to make it out to negative 2xy. Now, if you take the time to do that until you gain 100% confidence, then you probably won't get your signs backwards. How do the signs go on this one? Yeah, okay, some of you have that backwards. Okay, so you have a plus there, minus there. Now it's right. Okay, you can't have those signs backwards because if you do, it's the wrong combination. Okay, does that look good to everybody? Okay, you guys doing pretty good. That's good. Okay, next one's got a U and a V in it. Okay, so this one is going to go like this. So the first term is U and U. Okay, like that. Okay, and then the last term is going to be 24. So the possibilities for 24 are going to be like 1V and 24V, 2V and 12V, 3V and 8V, and 4V and 6V. So what's right? 3 and 8, right. Okay, 3 and 8 are 5 apart, so you can make them add up to negative 5. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and put in 3V there, and I'm going to put in 8V there. Okay, so that's going to give me a 3UV and an 8UV. So how do the signs go on this one? Again, some of you have this backwards. -8. Yeah, -8. Okay, the bigger one's got to be the negative. So it's got to be +3 minus 8. So that should be your right answer, like that. Okay? All right, so how are we doing? Okay. Now double check every time you do this so that you don't make any mistakes. You got to verify that you're right. Okay, now what we do is we've learned how to do common factors. So if you go down to this number 19, what you don't do is this. What the biggest mistake students make on these problems is they just immediately draw two parentheses. Bad mistake. Don't even go there. What you should always do at the beginning is see if you've got a common factor. So basically, you've got three terms. You've got 2x squared minus 2x, so it's a trinomial again. What is in common between all those numbers? 2. So you got to take it out. So you have to have your common factor thing down first. So 2 goes into all those numbers. So your first step is you want to draw 2, and then you only want to have one parenthesis. Don't go to 2 parentheses. And a lot of times students try to do the whole problem in their head. Don't do that. Got this intermediate step. Okay, so what do you multiply 2 by to get 2x squared? X squared. What do you multiply 2 by to get negative 2x? Just x. What do you multiply 2 by to get 12? Okay, like that. Okay. Now you can take that out and make sure that that's right. You know, in your mind, multiply by 2. Okay. Now what we're going to do is we're going to factor this part right there. Okay. Now what I'm going to do is I bring the 2 down. Do not lose that 2. That's an important part of your answer. But what we're going to do is we're going to draw 2 parentheses and we're going to factor what I got highlighted in yellow right there. Okay. So it's the same idea. So the first term is going to be x squared. So that's going to be x and x, like that. Okay, the last term is going to be 6. And don't pay any attention to that 2 we took out. That's set. It has nothing to do with the rest of the problem. So the possible numbers for 6 are 1 and 6 and 2 and 3. So what you want to do is figure out which one you could use to get a negative 1 out of it. So what's right? 2 and 3. Yeah, 1 and 6 you can get a 7 or a 5. Okay, 2 and 3 you can get a 5 or a 1. Okay, so the idea with this one is let's put a 2 and 3 there, and then let's get the signs right. So that's just a 2x there. Okay, the outer term is going to be 3x. So how do you make 2 and 3 add up to negative 1? Plus 2 minus 3. So you have a plus there and a minus there. And that's the whole answer. See, what only thing that's different on that problem is I took a common factor out. Okay, before I proceeded. Does that make any sense? You must take common factors out. If you have them, that's how you always start. That's why I highlighted this like in super boldface type. Okay, you have to pay attention to that. All right, does that make sense? Tell me, I don't know. Makes sense to me. How about to you? Okay, now let's check this one, because I do want to show you how the proper way really to check this. Now, you got a couple of ways you can check this, okay? You could distribute the 2 through the first parenthesis. You don't distribute 2 through both, though, because you have to go left to right. The best way to do this is to start off when you check is just multiply those out. Just do the FOIL, and then just leave the 2 down for now. That's the best way to do it, I think. Or you could do 2 times x plus 2, get the answer to that, then FOIL it times the x minus 3. So if I FOIL this, I'm going to have x squared minus 3x for the outer, plus 2x for the inner, and then minus 6 for the last like this. I'm actually just going in reverse what I did anyway. So this is 2 times x squared, and see those like terms, negative 3 plus 2 is negative 1x. And then we multiply everything by 2, and it should take us back to where we began. So if I do this, I'd have 2x squared, 2 times negative 1 is negative 2x, and then 2 times negative 6 is negative 12. That's what we did. See what I mean? Okay, so you can get an answer. The best way to check that is FOIL, then distribute by 2. Okay, tell me if that makes sense. That's a little harder now. Same ideas, though. It's just you got to start with a common factor. Okay, now let's look at this carefully. So let's see. With this one, we've got these 3 terms. We have x to the third y is a term. We have 15x squared y squared is the second term. And then the last term has a 54xy the third. Okay, let's look real carefully on this now. Okay, is there an x in every position?
Yes.
Yes, that means we can get an x out of there. So which x comes out? The third power, second power, or just the x?
Just the x.
Because it has the smallest exponent. Remember, you got smallest exponent. So when we take this out, we'll have an x out of there. Okay, do we have a y in every position?
Yes.
Y squared, y to the third. Okay, what comes out?
Y.
Y, the smallest exponent one, which is y to the first. So we do that. And that's it. See, if you look at 15, 54, and really that's a 1 right there, there's no common factors between 1, 15, and 54 other than 1. So what you want to do is you want to start by taking that common factor out. Okay? Now, it depends on your skill, okay? You can go ahead, if you want to. You could certainly just, in your head, figure out what goes inside. I want to remind you, you can also do it this way if it's helpful to you. So, if I just divide everything by xy, which is my common factor, then that should be a real simple way to tell us what goes inside. If you look at this, and again, you don't have to write all this out. I like to just kind of show students as much as I can the y part. So what cancels there? One of the x's, one of the y's. What are you left with? X squared. Okay, so that's an x squared. If you have to do that, do that. Okay, if you can do it in your head, do it in your head. Okay, the next one we have 15, x squared is x times x, y to the second's y times y. What cancels? One of the x's, one of the y's. What are you left with? 15xy. So that's going to be plus 15xy. If you do it that way, it's kind of hard to go wrong. Okay, but your goal is to do it in your head. Okay, the next one we have 54x times y times y times y. What cancels? An x and a y. What's left? 54y to the second. Okay, like that. Okay, so that's how that goes. Okay, so you have to be successful in getting that common factor out of there and then filling in what goes in the middle. Okay, does that look okay to everybody? Okay, always take the variable that's got the lowest exponent, okay, on that when you get that out. Now, if you look at this thing right here, that's a trinomial, and you've learned how to factor that kind of thing today. So what we need to do is just take this to one final step. Okay, so I'm going to bring down the xy, then I'm going to draw two parentheses, and don't pay any attention to this xy. That xy is a part of your answer, but it has no bearing on the factoring whatsoever. Okay, all right, so the first term is x squared. So what we're going to do is put a x and an x. Okay, the last term is 54. Okay, this time let's just see if we can do this in your head. What are two numbers that multiply to give 54 that add up to 15? 9 times 6, right? Okay, list them out if you have to. Now, if I just put a 9 and 6, what am I missing? Got to have that y, so be careful about that. You have to have 9y and you have to have 6y, like that. Okay, now if you kind of go through and check this, see that middle term is 9xy. That outer term is 6xy. You want it to add up to 15xy, so how do you make that happen? Just add them, 2 plus signs right there. So this right here, this whole thing right here would be the answer to the problem. What you've done is you've taken out that common factor on there before you proceeded with that. So you have to know how to do common factors or you won't be able to get anywhere with these problems. Okay, does that make sense to you guys? Okay, now I'm going to have you do the next two problems, then we'll take a break, okay? And these do have common factors, so the first thing that you want to do on these two things is get the common factors out with one parenthesis, then proceed. Your answer should have common factor and then 2 parentheses. That's the structure of this kind of problem. Okay, first thing is you need to understand you can't do these problems in your head. I see students all the time try to do it all in their head and it doesn't work. 3 is a common factor, so you must start with 1 parenthesis. You have to, you must. Okay, so what goes here? X squared. 3 times 4 is going to give you 12x, and then 3 times 4 is going to give you 12, like that. Okay, now that's not done. because you can also factor that trinomial further. So you want to bring the 3 down. The 3 is a part of your answer, so don't lose it. Okay, then when we do this, first term is x squared, so that means you're going to have an x and x there to get that. Last term's 4. Well, what are the possibilities? 4 times 1, 2 times 2. Which one's the right one if you're going to get a 4 to add up? 2 and 2. Okay, so you have to have a 2 and 2 there. Now remember what I'm doing is I'm factoring the part that I got highlighted. So that's like a 2x there, a 2x there. How do you make 2x and 2x add up to negative 4x? 2 negatives, okay? So there's actually 2 ways that you could write your answer. I'm okay, I think pretty much everybody who got this right wrote the answer that way. Is there another way you could write it? There is. Okay, what do you know if something's multiplied by itself twice? What's another way to write it? Like if I have 2 times 2, you could write that as 2 to the second, right? So you could, you're not required to, but it's good to write this on your paper. I'd like everybody to write that on your paper. You could also write it like that. It's the same answer. Okay, if you have a repeated factor, it's good to realize that you can do that. Okay? All right. So I think most of us got that okay. Does that look good to everybody? Okay. Now this next one, okay, you have x to the third minus x squared minus 42x. Okay, does this have an x in every position? Yes. Which one comes out? Lowest exponent, x the first. That one comes out. So your first step is to just take the x out. All that's going to do is make the exponents go down 1. So that would be x to the second, because x times x to the second is x to the third, minus x, because x times x is x to the second, then minus 42. So you got to get that taken out correctly before you move on. Okay? Do it in your head or divide. You know, some of you would do better if you just divide everything by x and do it that way if you need to. Okay? Now, when we go through and get our answer, the x is going to come down. We're going to draw 2 parentheses. And just focus on what's highlighted in yellow here. Okay, so the first term is x squared, so that's x and x. Now we got a 42. Now some of you got stuck on 42. Here's what you can do. Okay, you can take your calculator, and of course you know 1 times 42 works. 2 times 21. Now if you got stuck, and I can tell some of you got stuck there, that's because it's a 7. Predictably, a lot of times students don't know their 7s very good. So if I do 42 divided by 6, I get 7. And 6 times 7 is what we're after, see. Use your calculator to help you, okay? All right? Or watch football when football season gets here. That's how you learn your 7s, okay? That's how I learned my 7s when I was a kid. I watched football, okay? All right, so what we have is a 7 and 6, or backwards. So that's a 7x. Or that's a 6x, so tell me how you make the signs add up to negative 1x.
Positive 6x minus 7.
Very good. Okay, negative 7 plus 6 right there. That be your answer right there. Okay, so you got to get that common factor out first, and then once you have that, then you got it made. Do a different way to do the problem. Okay, all right, so what we're going to do is like factor by grouping. So, and I think on my math lab, when you view an example on these problems, this is likely to be what they show you. So I want to go ahead and show you this first, then we'll kind of pick up at where we left off here. So what you do, the first thing that you always do is you multiply the first times the last term. Okay, and we're going to change this into a factor by grouping problem. So what we really get here is that would be a 1 times 10 is equal to 10. So we do that. Okay? Then what we do on this is we look at all the factors of 10. And we're going to make this into a factor by grouping problem. So the factors of 10 are 1 and 10 or 2 and 5. Now what we're going to do is, since we know that these add up to 7, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to write this as 2s plus 5s to get that 7s like this. Now what you do is you change this into a factor by grouping problem. So watch this carefully. If you want to do the problems this way, you can do it this way. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to replace the 7 with 2s plus 5s. And it doesn't matter which order you put it in. I can do a 2s there and a 5s there, and then bring down the plus 10 like that. Okay, you're still using the same concept. You're looking for numbers that multiply to give 10 and add up to 7. Now, one thing that's kind of good about doing it this way is it helps you review your factor by grouping. So when we did factor by grouping, what I told you to do is just group together the first set and the last set like that. Okay? Now, look at this right here. What's the common factor that can come out for an s squared plus 2s? An s comes out. You have an s in both positions, so you can take an s out, and then s times s would be s to the second, then s times 2 would be 2s. Okay, that's taking a common factor out. Okay? Now, look at the next one. Tell me what the common factor for 5s plus 10 is. What goes into 5 and 10 at the same time? 5. Take a 5 out. So if you take a 5 out, what you would have is 5 times s is 5s. 5 times 2 is 10. Okay, does that look familiar? Okay, now check this out. Okay, what do you see that's in common now? That right there comes out. So what you can do when you write your answer is you just say s plus 2, and then like I showed you when we were working on section 5.5, when you take that out, what's left? S plus 5. That's the same answer we got. It's a totally different way of doing it. I think students probably in the long run, this is just me talking here, you want to be able to do it in your head the way I taught you, but this is an alternative method, and some students like doing it better this way. Okay, so I'm going to do one more that way. Did that make any sense?
No. Didn't make any sense at all.
No sense at all. Okay, well, maybe that you haven't done enough factor by grouping practice yet. Okay, so let me do this next one here. We have u squared minus 11u plus 28. So step one is you want to take the first term times the second to get 28. And then the second thing is you just look at all the factors of 28. So you would have like 1 and 28, 2 and 14, 4 and 7. We know that 4 and 7 are the right one. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to change this to negative 4u minus 7u. Okay, because I know I can make those add up to negative 11u. So what I do is I create a factor by grouping problem. And if you don't follow this, it's because you don't have your factor by grouping down yet, but you need to get that down soon. Okay, so that's u squared. I'm going to replace the negative 11u with negative 4u minus 7u plus 28. Okay, that's the one that you want to use. All right, now it's factor by grouping. So here's how it goes. You would put a parenthesis around the first two, bring down the minus, then you'd put a parenthesis around the second two, last two. You'd have to adjust that sign so it works correctly. All right, what's the common factor between u squared and u? U. So u times u is u to the second. U times 4 is 4. U, like that. What's the common factor for 7 and 28? 7. So 7 times u is 7u. 7 times 4 is 28. Okay, like that. Okay? Now, notice what's in common is u minus 4. So the answer would be u minus 4 there. Take your hands and cover. What's left? U minus 7. Okay, I already saw a couple of you guys out there doing the problems this way, which is fine. If you want to do it that way, do it that way. There's always some students who prefer doing it that way, which is fine with me. Okay? I do think you want to try as much as you can to try to just find the combination and do the simple ones in your head. Okay? Factor by grouping comes in handy on the next thing we're doing. I'm going to teach you mostly how to do this by trial and error. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to look at a different type of trinomial, and the idea is now you're going to have something in front of the squared term. That makes the factoring harder. Okay? So I want to just show you that if this was the factoring problem, this is the answer. I'm going to prove to you that that's the right answer. So what I'm going to have you do, and I do want you to write this down, let's go through and let's FOIL this and see if it takes you to the original thing. Okay, so when we do the first term, we'd have 8 times 4x is 32x squared. Okay, when I do the outside term, I'm going to have 8x times 3 is plus 24x. Okay, when I do the inside term, I have negative 1 times 4 is negative 4x. Then when I do the last term, I've got negative 1 times 3 is negative 3. Is everybody good with their foiling? Okay, do you see any like terms? These are like terms. 24 minus 4 is 20x minus 3. So what I was trying to show you is when we multiply the answer out, we got the problem. Now what my goal is to teach you how to get that answer right there, which is what I'm going to show you on this section. But the idea is when you factor something, you have the power and the ability to tell you're right. And that's super, super important. Okay? Everything's checkable when you factor. Everything is. Okay? Okay, so I'm going to show you how to do this one. Now, what makes this problem different is there's now a number in front of x squared. So it's not a matter of looking at numbers that multiply to give 12 and add up to 17. It is not the same problem anymore. So what I like to have students do when you're learning this, first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to teach you trial and error. Then I'm going to repeat this problem by factor by grouping to give you let you make a decision on which way you'd rather do it. Okay, so first of all, that's the first term. That's the last term. And then that's the outer and inner like we've been doing. Now I'm going to have you make a chart out on this like this for the first and last term because there's more than one possibility. The first term has two possibilities. You could have 2x times 3x or you could have 1x times 6x, right? Okay, so that's what's different as all the other problems you did. The first term was always just x and x or y and y like that. Now it's different. Okay, now we look at the last term. The last term is 12. So what are the possibilities? 1 and 12, 2 and 6, 3 and 4. Okay, like that. So you write down all the possibilities. Now we're going to do it by trial and error. And a lot of students hate trial and error. They think it's a bad mathematical technique. It's a very good technique. Okay? And on this problem, when people go to higher math, most of the time, you want to do this guess and check. Okay? But I'll teach you factor by grouping here in a minute. All right, so here's one thing that you might want to write down. It's usually a good idea to pick close. So notice that the 17 is kind of close to the 12 and 6. Those three numbers are all relatively close. So that means I'm going to pick close like this. Now that doesn't mean it's going to work, but that's where I'm going to start. If that middle term was like 100x, like an oddball number, then it would make sense to pick far, like that. So it saves you a little bit of time. So let's put a 2x there, and let's put a 3x there. Okay, then let's put like a 3 there and a 4 there. Now we're going to see if it works. So what you do is you start by just picking and trying. Now this is where it becomes important that you do this visual. So if you multiply the inner term, what is that? 9x. If you multiply the outer term, what's that? 8x. What are you trying to get out of this problem? 17x. Okay, is that going to work? Can you make 9 and 8 out to 17? Yeah, 9 plus 8 is 17, right? So that means both of them have to be plus. Yes?
What do you mean by pick close?
Okay, which numbers are closer together, 1 and 12 or 3 and 4? Or 2 and 6? Try to use the ones closest together. More often than not, that probably works. But the reason I'm doing that is because 6, 17, and 12 are all pretty close to each other. Like if the 17 was 100, then it wouldn't make as much sense to pick close. You'd have to get that big number, you'd have to use bigger numbers, see? Okay? All right, so that means you have a plus there and a plus there. So that's your answer right there. And of course, you could FOIL that out and prove that it's right. Okay? Does that make any sense? You guess and check. You have to. Okay, it's not as simple as the other trinomials. Okay, now I also want you to write down factor by grouping. Okay, sometimes students do these problems a lot better if they go ahead and do factor by grouping. Okay, so what we do in factor by grouping, step 1 is we take the first term, Don't worry about the x, just multiply it by 12. So 6 times 12 is 72. Okay, like that. Now what you're going to do next is you're going to look at factors of 72 that add up to 17. Now I'm going to write some of these down, so you could have like 1 and 72, you could have 2 and 36, 3 and 24. Don't worry if you can't do this fast like I'm doing this, it doesn't matter. Okay, then I'd have like 6 and 12, and let's see, other place I'd have is 8 and 9. Okay, now I want you to tell me, out of these numbers, which one are you going to get to add up to 17? 8 and 9, exactly. Okay, so that means what you do, when you do factor by grouping, you do this like this. You're going to write this as just 8x plus 9x. So when we go to the original problem, this is the way you should write out your process. So what you're doing again when you do factor by grouping is multiply first times last, and then try to figure out the factors of 72 that add up to 17. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to change this to like this. Instead of writing 17x, I'm going to write like this. And it doesn't matter which order. 8x plus 9x plus 12. That's the whole key, is to figure that 8 and 9 out. Does that make sense? Tell me. Okay. Now let's go through and let's factor by grouping. Okay, so we're going to pair together the first pair and pair together the last pair, like that. Okay? Now, you got to look real carefully on this one. How about 6 and 8? What's the common factor for 6 and 8? 2. How about x squared and x? What comes out? X. Okay, so you got to fill in that blank right there. Do this in your head. What do you multiply 2x by to get 6x squared? 3x. What do you multiply 2x by to get 8x? A 4. Okay. Now look at the next one. What's the factor for 9 and 12? 3. So we have plus 3. And then 3 times 3x is 9x. 3 times 4 is 12. Okay. Now look at this. What's in common? Ah, we had a 3x plus 4 in our answer, right? Take your hands and cover what's left.
2x plus 3.
See? So it works that way. One of the nice things about factor by grouping is there's no guesswork in it anymore. So a lot of times students don't like to do this by just kind of trial and error. So that's a strategy that you can always use if you want to. It's your call. Okay? As I'm teaching the rest of these, I'm going to do the rest of these by trial and error, because ultimately most of the time it's faster when you practice this to do it by trial and error. Okay? Okay, so let's look at the next one here. Now look at these numbers, 2, 9, and 10, 9, and 9. They're all close, right? There's no oddball numbers. So we're going to make a chart, and we're going to do this by trial and error. Okay, what are the possible things that multiply to give 10? There's only 2 things. 1 and 10, 2 and 5, right? Write down the possibilities. So I'm going to write down 1z times 10z. And I'll write down 2z times 5z. Figure out all the possibilities. Okay? What are the possibilities for 9?
1 times 9 is
1 and 9, 3 and 3. Okay, that's it. 1 and 9, 3 and 3. So when you do this by trial and error, kind of get organized and get all of the possible things that there are. Okay, I'm going to pick close. Does everybody understand what I mean by that? Okay, what's closer, 1 and 10 or 2 and 5?
1 and
Close, 3 apart. 1 and 10 or 9 apart. What's closer, 1 and 9 or 3 and 3? 3 and 3 is about as close as you can get, right? Okay, that's why I'm doing that, and I'm doing that because all 3 numbers in the problem are close to each other. Okay, so let's do, draw 2 parentheses, just put it in. So we're going to have 2z here and 5z there. Then we're going to put a 3 and 3. Now all you got to do is just see if it works or not. If it doesn't work, try something else. Okay? So that inner term is going to be 15z. That outer term is going to be 6z. What are you trying to get?
9z.
Okay, tell me, can you make 15 and 6 add up to 9? Yeah, one of them's got to be negative. Which one? The 6. Okay, if you have a plus 15 and a minus 6, then you got it. Okay, does that make sense? Now I got to figure out where the signs go, but I know that I can make the inner and outer add up to 9 now. Okay, well, where did the 15 come from? It came from doing 5 times 3, so that means that has to be plus if you're going to get a plus 15. Where did the 6 come from? That came from 2 times 3. So if you're going to make 2 times 3 negative 6, that means you have a minus there. So the final answer of the problem would then be 2z plus 3, 5z minus 3. You could FOIL and easily verify that that's the right answer of the problem. Okay? That's the trial and error approach. Does that make any sense? You just have to list the possibilities. If you don't like doing it this way, then start practicing that factor by grouping and doing it the other way. Because you can do it the other way without any trial and error. Okay? Okay, I'm going to look at one more here. Okay, so on this 26, okay, we'll again make out kind of a chart just for the first and last. I'll see this one's got several possibilities. Okay, what are the possibilities of numbers multiplied to give 4? 1 and 4, 2 and 2. Now don't forget the x, so we'll have like 1x times 4x. If that doesn't work, we could go with 2x times 2x, like that. Okay? Now, what are the numbers that would multiply to give 6? 1 and 6 or 2 and 3. Okay? Now, this one to me, you could, I'm going to go ahead and try to pick close, but if you look at 23, isn't that kind of like way bigger than the other two? So it might make sense to pick far. I'm going to kind of show you what happens if you pick close. All right, so let's just say that we start with 2x and 2x, and then let's say we start with 2 and 3, like that. Let me show you what would happen, because you're going to guess wrong when you do these things. So if I did this, that would be 4x. The outside term would be 6x. What are you trying to get? Negative 23x. Okay, so that doesn't work, so scratch that idea. And what you have to do on this is sometimes you have to just try things until you get it. Now what I'm going to do on this is, and I don't know if it'll work, just because that number is like it's 4 times bigger than the other ones pretty much. Let's try this way and see what happens. Okay, so let's try like x and 4x, and then let's try 1 and 6 like that. I'm going to do it wrong on purpose. That's part of the learning process. Okay, let's see what happens. This middle term, inner term would be 4x. Outer term, what's that? 6x. What are we trying to get? Negative 23x. Does that work? No, you can't make 4 and 6 add up to 23. So here's what you want to do. You want to, and this is real important, is you want to switch things. So that didn't work. Let's try it this way. Let's try x and x. And instead of 1 and 6, let's try, or I'm sorry, x and 4x. Let me get that right here. So I'm going to try it one other way here. Let's try x and 4x. And then this time, let's try 6 and 1. See, sometimes if it doesn't work one way, it might work the other way. So let's see. What's 6 times 4? 24x. 1 times x. 1x. What are we after? What do you think? I like it. Okay, I found it. So how do you make the signs go for 24 and 1? Negative 24 plus 1 like that. Okay, now where did the 24 come from? It came from 4 times 6, so the 6 has to be negative. The 1x came from the outer term, so that's got to be positive. So that's your answer to your problem right there. Okay, and see, trial and error, you can get into situations where you may have to do that several times. Okay, if you don't like that, go to the work with the factor by grouping. Okay, all right, does that make any sense? This is harder. It's not as easy as the other things you did. You have to work with these a little more. Okay, so I'm going to let you work on the next two, and I'll see how you do. Now let's just do this by trial and error. If you're solid with doing it the other way, you can do it the other way too if you want to. It's good to know both, really. And these two problems don't have lots of combinations. If there's lots of combinations, the problems can get pretty hard. They can get pretty hard either way, by the way. Even if you do factor by grouping, sometimes when you multiply first and last terms, they can get into really big numbers. So you want to be. So let's see on this next one here. What I want to go ahead and look at, the first term on here, you'd have like 3y and 3y as one possibility, or 1y and 9y. Then for the 8, you could have 1 and 8, or you could have 2 and 4. Okay? Now, what I'm going to do is since all three numbers are fairly close, I'll start that way. Okay? So I'm going to go 3y and 3y, and I'm going to go 2 and 4 and see if I can get that to work. Okay? And the whole key is this visual. 2 times 3 is 6y. The outer term, 3y times 4 is 12y. What are we trying to get? So we found it, see? So how do the signs go? Plus, plus. Okay, so you got to have a plus there, and you got to have a plus there. Problem done. Okay, so see, sometimes you guess right the first time. Sometimes you have to go through it 3 or 4 times. Just depends. So there's your answer. Okay? All right, let's see. The next one, what we have here is we have 15z to the second. So we could have 1z and 15z. And if that doesn't work, we could do 3z and we could do 5z. And then for the 8, 1 and 8, 2 and 4, like that. Now, to me, all three of those numbers in the problem are relatively close to one another. So for that reason, I'm going to go with those. Okay? So just write it down. Now, one thing about these problems is they're hard to do in your head. You have to write something on your paper. Okay? So don't try to overanalyze it. Just write on your paper. So I'm going to have 3z here and 5z here. Then I'm going to put a 2 and 4. Now, it may not work that way. I may have to adjust it. So let's see what happens. If I go this way, that's a 10z. And if I go that way, that's a 12z. You're trying to get a negative 14z. So is that going to work? No. So what do? You do go backwards. Don't forget to try backwards. If it doesn't work that way, then maybe it'll work if we just switch those last two numbers. So I'm going to go like this, 4 and 2. And perhaps it'll work. Okay, so if I do this, that's 20z. If I do it this way, that's 6z. What am I after? I think I found it. What do you think? See, that's it. Just kind of had to try it a couple of times. So the signs have got to be negative with the 20 and then a plus like that. Now, you got to know which is which in the problem. So the 20 comes from here. If you're going to make that a negative 20z, that means that's got to be a minus there. And if you're going to get a 6, you have to have the plus there. So the correct answer would be 3z minus 4 in one parenthesis and 5z plus 2 in the other. That would be the idea. Okay, how's that look? It's harder, okay, but it's doable. That's how you can do that with a trial and error approach. Okay, now I'm going to go through a couple of more things here to kind of finish up here. This one is the same that we did, except it's got 2 variables. So I'm going to still kind of look at this the same way with a trial and error approach. Okay, so my first term, I'm going to look at 1x and 8x. Then I'm going to look at 2x and 4x are my 2 possibilities. Okay, the last term, don't worry about the negative. Let's just worry about like 1t and 9t and 3t and 3t there. Okay, so what do you think I should choose? Close, okay. All right, not always, but if the 3 numbers are fairly close, then pick close. Don't waste your time. Okay, don't just randomly start doing stuff. Let's try that and let's see what we get. So let's put a 2x and a 4x there. And let's put a 3t and a 3t there, like that. Okay, now remember, the key thing is we want that middle term to add up to 6xt. So let's see if we're on the right track here. So if you look at this middle term, that's going to be 12xt or tx. Doesn't matter what order. Okay, the last term is going to come together to make a 6xt. We're trying to get 6xt. So what do you think of that combination? Will that work?
Yeah.
Absolutely. How do you make 12 and 6 add up to just a 12? Which is which?
So it'd be positive 3t.
Okay, plus 12, right? Minus 6. 12 minus 6 is 6. So that's going to be the combination you're looking for. So that means you have to have a positive here to get that positive 12xt, and a negative for the outside term to get that. Okay, so there's your answer right there. I guessed right the first time. Okay, is that good? Okay, I'm going to do one more, then we'll close it off here. Let me do, go ahead and just do this one. And this one, you can do this one of two ways. Now, you can fill in a chart on this one too. This one, if you did a chart here with the first and last, there's two ways you can do this. So if you look at the first term, we could have 1 and 36. We could have 2 and 18, 3 and 12, 4 and 9, or even 6 and 6, like that. And then the last term only has one possibility. So if it has one possibility, then we can do it. We don't have to do trial and error necessarily. So I'm just going to do this kind of like this. So let's go with the 6 and 6, and let's go with the x and x like that. Okay, let's see if this is the right one. 6 and 6 there, x and x there. Let's see if we can get that to work. Okay, so if I do this, that middle term is going to be 6x. That outer term is also going to be 6x. What are we trying to accomplish here? Okay, what do you think? Is that going to work? Yep, how did signs go? Minus, minus. Okay, so you could write the answer like this. You could write it as 6 minus x times 6 minus x. So that would be one way to write the answer. Yeah. Like this, we have 6 minus x, 6 minus x, or you could write it as 6 minus x to the second. It doesn't make any difference. I don't care which way you write it. You just need to know that they're both the same answer. Okay? Now let me show you one other thing on this problem. Is if you wanted to, you could just rearrange all the terms like this and just kind of put everything backwards. Put the x squared minus 12x plus 36, and you do it this way. And if you did it this way, your first term would just be x and x. That's the only possibility. Your last term would be 6 times 6 to get 36. And then if you look at that inner term, that would be 6x and 6x. So how do you make 6 and 6 add up to negative 12? You have two minus signs. So it turns out on this problem, there's 4 ways you could write your answer. You could write your answer that way. That's a valid answer. You could write your answer that way. That's valid. You could write it this way. That's valid. Or you could even write it as 6 minus x squared. Or, hold on, x minus 6 squared. Like that. That's just basically has the terms backwards, but that could be written in any of those ways like that. Okay? All right, so we'll focus on this, finish this up a little bit next time.